At its peak in the 1930s, one factory in Camden, New Jersey produced 10 million cans every single day. 10 million. That's enough soup to give every person in New York City 3 cans, daily. Not weekly, not monthly, every 24 hours. Walk into that Camden plant during tomato season and you'd see something extraordinary. Rows of steel machinery stretching further than a city block. 5,000 workers on the floor at any given moment. Thousands more flooding in during harvest time. High school students, housewives, fresh arrivals from Puerto Rico, all coming for work that seemed endless. The sound was deafening. The heat brutal. But the money kept flowing. This wasn't just a factory. This was the beating heart of an empire. The Campbell Soup Company didn't just dominate the canned soup industry. It invented it. Those red and white cans became more American than apple pie, more recognizable than Coca-Cola. By mid-century, Campbell's controlled an astonishing share of the soup market that competitors couldn't touch. Then something went catastrophically wrong. By 1991, that same factory stood silent, empty. The iconic water towers painted to look like giant soup cans, demolished. The production lines that once roared with activity, sold for scrap. 1,000 workers in Camden alone received their final paychecks. The last can rolled off the line on March 1st, 1990. The next day, they locked the doors. Forever. So how does a company that fed America for over a century abandon the very factory where it all began? This is the story of Campbell Soup Factory in Camden, a tale of immigrant ambition, chemical innovation, and brutal efficiency that built an American icon, then watched it crumble under the weight of changing times, labor battles, and corporate calculation. Welcome inside the Camden waterfront, where the most famous soup in American history was born, thrived, and died. 1869, Camden, New Jersey. 2 men stood on opposite sides of a wooden table in a drafty brick building near the Delaware River waterfront. Joseph Campbell, fruit merchant from Bridgeton, still had dirt under his fingernails from handling tomatoes. Across from him sat Abraham Anderson, an icebox manufacturer whose hands bore the calluses of metalwork. Neither man came from wealth. Neither had formal business training, but both understood something fundamental about post-Civil War America. People needed food that wouldn't spoil. They shook hands. Anderson and Campbell. $400 between them. Enough for canning equipment and ingredients. Nothing more. Camden in 1869 was a city of modest ambition. The Delaware River provided access to Philadelphia's markets just across the water. South Jersey farms surrounded the city, bursting with tomatoes, vegetables, corn. Perfect for canning. But they weren't special. Dozens of small canneries dotted the region. Everyone was canning tomatoes. Everyone was canning vegetables. The margins were thin. The competition fierce. Anderson and Campbell started simply. Canned tomatoes, vegetables, jellies, sups in jars, condiments, minced meats. Quality mattered, but so did dozens of other producers making the exact same products. For 7 years, the partnership held steady. Not wealthy, not failing, just operating. Then, in 1876, something shifted. Anderson wanted out. No record explains exactly why. Perhaps he saw better opportunities in his icebox business. Perhaps he and Campbell disagreed about direction. Whatever the reason, Anderson left. Campbell bought his share. The company became Joseph A. Campbell Preserve Company. Joseph Campbell was 52 years old when he became sole owner. Most men that age would have been thinking about retirement, not expansion. But Campbell had vision. His nephew, Joseph S. Campbell, joined the firm. So did Campbell's son-in-law, Walter S. Spackman. In 1882, they brought in Arthur Dorrance, Spackman's friend who had cash to invest. The partnership reformed. New capital flowed in. The company renamed itself Joseph Campbell Preserving Company. But here's the thing. Even with new money and new partners, they were still just another canning operation. The breakthrough that would change everything? That hadn't happened yet. That required someone who didn't even work for the company yet, someone who, in 1897, was finishing his doctorate in chemistry in Germany, completely unaware that he would soon revolutionize American food forever. Meanwhile, Joseph Campbell kept working, kept canning, kept waiting for whatever came next. 1897, Camden, New Jersey. Arthur Dorrance sat in his office reviewing yet another request for employment. His nephew, again, John Thompson Dorrance, had graduated from MIT with a degree in chemistry, then went to Germany, got his doctorate from the University of Göttingen, worked in fine restaurants in Paris learning about soup flavorings, 24 years old with credentials that should have opened doors everywhere. But Arthur Dorrance wasn't impressed. He'd already turned down his nephew multiple times. The Joseph Campbell Preserve Company didn't need chemists. They needed packers, canners, workers who could move product, not academics with fancy degrees. John Dorrance made a proposal so desperate it bordered on insulting. He would work for $7.50 per week, a fraction of what a man with his education could command elsewhere. More humiliating still, he would pay for his own laboratory equipment out of pocket. Arthur Dorrance finally agreed, not because he believed in the idea, but because refusing family again would have caused problems. John Dorrance set up his laboratory in a corner of the Camden factory. While other workers packed tomatoes into jars, he conducted experiments. The problem he focused on was elegant in its simplicity. Soup was heavy. The heaviest ingredient? Water. Transporting soup meant transporting water. Storing soup meant storing water. Water that added nothing to nutrition or flavor but dramatically increased shipping costs. The solution seemed impossible. How do you remove water from soup without destroying it? Dorrance experimented with temperatures, pressures, timing. Month after month of failures. Soaps that separated. Soaps that congealed. Soaps that tasted like paste. His uncle watched with growing skepticism. $7.50 a week for this? Then in 1897, Dorrance succeeded. He developed a process to condense soup by removing water while preserving flavor, texture, and nutritional value. Add water back before eating. Simple. Revolutionary. Genius. The implications were staggering. A condensed can weigh half as much as a regular can. Storage costs dropped. Shipping costs dropped. Retail prices could drop. A can of soup that previously sold for 30 cents could now sell for 10 cents. 10 cents, within reach of working-class families who'd never been able to afford convenience foods before. Arthur Dorrance immediately raised his nephew's salary to $9 per week. John Dorrance had just invented condensed soup. The Joseph Campbell Preserve Company had just found its future. They introduced 21 varieties of condensed soups, all priced at 10 cents per can. All fundamentally changed how Americans would eat for the next century. But the chemist wasn't done, not even close. 1898. Camden, New Jersey. Herbert and Williams, a Campbell's executive, attended the Cornell University versus University of Pennsylvania football game in Philadelphia. While most fans watched the players, Williams found himself fixated on something else, the crisp carnelian red of Cornell's uniforms against their bright white trim. The color combination struck him as bold, memorable, impossible to ignore. The next Monday morning, Williams walked into a meeting and made a suggestion that would define American grocery aisles for generations. Paint the soup cans red and white. The executives agreed. Campbell's condensed soups, already revolutionary in price and concept, now had visual branding that screamed from shelves. 2 years later, in 1900, those cans won a gold medal at the Paris International Exposition for Product Excellence. The bronze medallion from that award still appears on every Campbell's can today. Joseph Campbell retired that same year. He'd seen his company transform from a regional canning operation into something much bigger. Arthur Dorrance became president, and John Dorrance, the chemist who started at $7.50 per week, became vice president. But John Dorrance wasn't satisfied with just inventing condensed soup. He obsessed over every detail of production. He hired agronomists to develop perfect tomato seeds. He dictated to farmers exactly how much fertilizer to apply and when. In the factory, his industrial engineers observed every task workers performed. They calculated optimal procedures. They determined precise wages for each subtask. Scientific management applied ruthlessly. The results were extraordinary. The Camden cannery expanded. Production increased. During peak tomato season, the factory operated 24 hours a day. The sound of machinery never stopped. Steam rose constantly from the buildings. The smell of cooking tomatoes and vegetables filled entire neighborhoods. Workers came in shifts. Thousands of them. Many immigrants. Many women. Many temporary laborers who appeared during harvest and disappeared after. In 1914, John Dorrance became president of the company. His uncle Arthur had recognized what the chemist built. The following year, Dorrance did something stunning. He bought out the entire Campbell family. The company that bore Joseph Campbell's name was now completely owned by the Dorrance family. In 1922, they made it official. The Joseph Campbell Company became Campbell Soup Company. The focus was clear. The product was clear. And in Camden, the factory kept growing. Bigger buildings, more workers, more cans. By the 1930s, that Camden plant would reach its absolute peak. 10 million cans per day. But with that growth came tensions that nobody in management wanted to acknowledge. 1904. Philadelphia. Grace Drayton was already a successful illustrator when her husband, Theodore Wiedersheim, walked into a meeting with Campbell's marketing team carrying samples of his wife's work. Wiedersheim operated a lithography company that printed Campbell's streetcar advertisements. He knew what the company needed, a character that would make condensed soup appeal to families, to mothers, to children. Grace Drayton specialized in drawing cherubic children with round faces, wide-set eyes, rosy cheeks, and pudgy bodies. She modeled them partially after her own appearance, having stated in a newspaper interview years later that she knew she looked funny and found it interesting. The Campbell executives saw her portfolio and immediately understood. These weren't just cute drawings. These were characters that embodied health and wholesomeness at a time when plumpness signified prosperity. The Campbell Kids debuted in 1905 on streetcar advertisements throughout Philadelphia and Camden. Round-faced toddlers holding spoons, smiling with impossible cheerfulness, promoting Campbell's condensed soups for 10 cents. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The characters became a phenomenon. The E.I. Horsman Company licensed them for dolls. Suddenly, Campbell Kids dolls were everywhere, in stores, in homes, collectibles that people treasured. For 2 decades, the Campbell Kids appeared in virtually every Campbell's advertisement, streetcars, magazines. Eventually, as decades passed, television commercials. They predated QP dolls by 5 years. They became so embedded in American consciousness that people who'd never even eaten Campbell's soup recognized them instantly. Grace Drayton's creation did something that few marketing campaigns achieve. It made a product synonymous with childhood, family, and home. Campbell's wasn't just selling soup anymore. They were selling comfort, nostalgia, the promise that a warm bowl of soup represented everything safe and good about American domestic life. The kids appeared on calendars, cookie jars, playing cards, thermoses, lunchboxes, pins, plates, and hundreds of other items. Through the 1920s, their presence diminished somewhat as Campbell's tried other marketing approaches. But in 1954, for the company's 50th anniversary, Campbell's brought the kids back with renewed fervor. New dolls, new merchandise, new commercials. The characters proved timeless. What Grace Drayton couldn't have known when she first drew those round faces was that she'd created advertising mascots that would outlive not just her own career, but the very factory where the soup was made. The Campbell Kids would survive into the 21st century. The Camden factory wouldn't. Meanwhile, in that same Camden factory, problems were building that no amount of charming advertising could solve. If you're finding this story fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue bringing you these deep dives into history. 1934. Camden, New Jersey. The factory floor was hell in summer, 100 degrees inside the canning rooms. Steam from cooking soup condensing on metal pipes and dripping onto workers below. The noise from machinery so loud that supervisors had to shout directly into workers' ears to be heard. The pace relentless. John Dorrance's scientific management meant every motion was timed, every second accounted for. Any slowdown noted. Workers earned low wages for long hours in dangerous conditions. Dorrance had calculated the precise minimum payment required for each task, not a cent more. His industrial engineers observed with stopwatches and clipboards, constantly pushing for greater efficiency. The pressure to produce 10 million cans per day during peak season meant workers couldn't stop, couldn't rest, couldn't complain. Then, in April 1934, something snapped. A spontaneous strike erupted. No union organized it. No leadership planned it. Workers simply stopped, walked out. 500 of them marched to Camden City Hall, demanding better wages and recognition of their right to unionize. The company was furious. This wasn't how things worked. Dorrance controlled everything. The seeds, the farming methods, the factory procedures, the wages. Workers didn't just walk out. Except they did. The strike made regional newspapers. Strike started on wage demands at Soup Factory, announced the Public Ledger in Philadelphia. 500 soup plant strikers storm Camden City Hall, reported the Evening Bulletin. The National Labor Board got involved. This wasn't a small dispute anymore. This was a test of whether industrial workers in the New Deal era could force change. The 1934 strike ultimately failed to immediately win union recognition. But it planted seeds. Workers had discovered they had power. Campbell's had discovered its workforce wouldn't stay silent forever. The Dorrance family had built extraordinary wealth from the Camden factory. 10 million cans per day generated massive profits. But maintaining that production required grinding labor from thousands of workers who'd just proven they could organize. Over the next 6 years, organizing continued quietly. In 1940, workers finally achieved union recognition. Local 80 of the United Food and Commercial Workers formed officially. From that point forward, Campbell's labor relations became characterized by work stoppages and industrial actions. Workers demanded better conditions. The company resisted. Strikes became regular features in area newspapers. Campbell's response was strategic and ruthless. Start building factories elsewhere. Find new sources of lower-wage labor. Make Camden's workers replaceable. The seeds of the factory's eventual closing were being planted decades before the final shutdown, because John Dorrance's son, unlike his father, understood that controlling labor meant being willing to leave labor behind. 1950. Camden, New Jersey. Anyone crossing the Benjamin Franklin Bridge from Philadelphia to Camden saw them immediately. Giant water towers painted to look like Campbell's red and white soup cans, the most recognizable corporate branding in America looming over the Camden waterfront, visible for miles. Impossible to ignore. The towers weren't just functional infrastructure. They were statements. Campbell Soup Company owned Camden, dominated Camden, deminded Camden, divined Camden. At its peak in the middle decades of the 20th century, the company employed 5,000 production workers year-round at the Camden plants. During tomato harvest season, That number swelled dramatically. High school students took summer jobs. Housewives worked temporary positions. Fresh immigrants from Puerto Rico arrived seeking work that seemed limitless. Plant number 2. Originally a tomato processing facility, manufactured 35% of all Campbell's products in the 1950s. Pork and beans. Tomato juice. V8 vegetable juice. Franco-American spaghetti. Macaroni and cheese. Bean with bacon soup. Cream of mushroom. Cream of celery. Cream of asparagus. The variety seemed endless. The production capacity staggering. The company aggressively invested in advertising. Campbell sponsored Orson Welles' radio program, The Campbell Playhouse, which had previously been the Mercury Theater on the air. After Welles's adaptation of The War of the Worlds caused mass panic in October 1938, Campbell's recognized the publicity value and became sponsor in December 1938. When television arrived in American homes during the 1950s, Campbell's was among the first major advertisers. They sponsored highly rated shows like Lassie. The Campbell Kids danced across screens in commercials. Ronald Reagan appeared in advertisements for V8 vegetable juice when Campbell's acquired the brand in 1948. The company understood that dominating grocery shelves required dominating media. But here's what the cheerful commercials and iconic water towers disguised. Tensions kept building. In 1946, Camden and Chicago union locals won a united strike. Workers demonstrated they could coordinate across Campbell's facilities. The company took note. In 1968, unions attempted a multi-plant strike that ultimately failed. Campbell's had learned to pit facilities against each other. To keep workers divided, more ominously, in 1979, Campbell made a decision that would doom the Camden factory. They stopped using South Jersey's famous tomatoes, the tomatoes that had been the company's foundation since 1869. Instead, Campbell switched to industrially produced tomato paste from California. Cheaper, more consistent, and crucially, it meant production didn't need to happen in Camden anymore. The water tower still stood, but their time was running out. 1962, Los Angeles, California. On July 9th, a 33-year-old artist named Andy Warhol opened his first solo painting exhibition at the Ferris Gallery. The subject matter confused visitors. 32 canvases, each one 20 inches high by 16 inches wide, each depicting a different flavor of Campbell's condensed soup. Tomato, chicken noodle, pepper pot, cream of celery. All 32 varieties the company sold. Gallery owner Irving Bloom displayed the paintings on narrow shelves running the length of the gallery, like a supermarket aisle. Not like art. The art world didn't know what to make of it. This wasn't abstract expressionism with its emotional brushwork and tortured genius. This was soup cans. Commercial products, mass-produced packaging transformed into paintings. Some critics called it an insult to fine art. Lazy reproduction of corporate design unworthy of serious attention. The gallery next door even mocked the exhibition by displaying real Campbell soup cans for 29 cents a piece. Warhol himself barely attended the show. It seemed destined for obscurity. But something fundamental was shifting in American culture. Post-war America had become defined by mass production and consumerism. Campbell Soup represented that transformation perfectly. The red and white label had changed little since 1898. The cursive Campbell script resembled founder Joseph Campbell's own signature. The product was standardized, reliable, ubiquitous. Rich and poor ate the same soup. That democratic quality appealed to Warhol. When asked why he painted soup cans, Warhol replied, "I used to drink it. I used to have the same lunch every day for 20 years. The paintings weren't critiques, they were celebrations. Or perhaps reflections." Warhol saw beauty in the mundane, meaning in repetition. His art merged advertising language with painting traditions, placing supermarket products on gallery walls. Irving Blum sold 6 individual paintings from the set, including one to actor Dennis Hopper. Then Blum recognized something crucial. the paintings should stay together. As a set, they made a statement. He bought back the ones he'd sold and paid Warhol $1,000 over 10 months for all 32 works. A deal that seemed reasonable at the time. After Warhol's death, Blum eventually sold the complete set to New York's Museum of Modern Art for upward of $15 million. The paintings became canonical symbols of pop art. They appeared in textbooks, museums, art history classes worldwide. Campbell soup cans had transcended being mere products. They were American culture itself, frozen in paint. Meanwhile, back in Camden, the factory that actually made those soups was beginning its long decline. 1980. Camden, New Jersey. Plant number 2 shut down quietly. The original tomato processing facility that had manufactured 35% of Campbell's products in the 1950s closed its doors permanently. Production shifted to other facilities. Workers received notices. The building that had hummed with activity for decades went silent. Nobody panicked. Campbell Soup Company was still thriving nationally. Acquisitions had expanded the portfolio. Pepperidge Farm baked goods in 1961. Franco-American products. V8 juices. Swanson Broughts. Godiva chocolates. The company had diversified far beyond soup. Sales kept growing. Profits remained strong. But in Camden, something was changing. The relationship between the city and its most famous company had always been complicated. Campbell's provided jobs. Thousands of them. The company participated in charity events, built facilities, maintained headquarters downtown. But labor relations remained contentious. Strikes continued through the 1970s. Work stoppages disrupted production. Union workers demanded fair wages and better conditions. Management pushed back. The company's strategy became clear. Build new plants in rural areas where unions had less power. Napoleon, Ohio. Paris, Texas. Maxton, North Carolina. These locations offered cheaper labor, less confrontational workforces, more modern facilities designed for efficiency. Camden's aging infrastructure couldn't compete. The shift away from South Jersey tomatoes in 1979 proved decisive. Once Campbell's no longer needed local agriculture, the company no longer needed Camden's location. The Delaware River access that made Camden attractive in 1869 didn't matter anymore. Interstate highways and modern logistics meant production could happen anywhere. By 1988, Campbell's earnings began declining despite rising sales. President and CEO R. Gordon McGovern had pursued aggressive expansion, acquisitions, new product lines, capital commitments that looked brilliant on paper but drained profits. From 1988 to 1990, earnings fell from $274 million to $4 million. $4 million, almost nothing for a company Campbell's size. McGovern attempted a merger with Quaker Oats Company in 1989. It failed. The board lost confidence. In January 1990, David W. Johnson became the first outsider ever brought in to head Campbell Soup Company. His mandate was simple: streamline operations, cut costs, return to profitability. Johnson looked at the numbers. Camden employed 940 workers. The plant was old, inefficient, union contracts were expensive, renovations would cost millions. Meanwhile, newer facilities in Ohio, Texas, and North Carolina operated with lower costs and less confrontation. The decision was mathematical, brutal, inevitable. On August 24, 1989, Campbell's board of directors approved a restructuring plan. 4 domestic plants would close. Camden was one of them. August 24, 1989. Camden, New Jersey. Campbell Soup Company announced plant closures as part of a worldwide restructuring. Camden's original manufacturing facility, Pocomoke City, Maryland, Crisfield, Maryland, Smyrna, Tennessee, all closing. 2,800 jobs eliminated. The Camden plant alone employed 940 people, 1,000 workers from Camden when counting related positions. James Moran, company spokesman, tried to soften the blow. Many Camden workers had already reached retirement age, he noted. As if that made it easier, as if decades of service entitled them to watch the company abandon the city where it started. President and CEO R. Gordon McGovern issued a statement emphasizing the company's commitment to controlling costs and addressing weak spots in manufacturing and distribution. "We are committed to being a low-cost producer," he said. Translation: Camden was too expensive. The closure would be phased, production ending by the end of 1990. The company would shift manufacturing to Napoleon, Ohio. Paris, Texas. Maxton, North Carolina. Places where Campbell's had built newer facilities. Places without Camden's history. Without Camden's unions. Without Camden's demands for fair wages. Workers received severance packages calculated by years of service. 1 week's payment for each year of employment, 6 months of paid medical benefits, the option to pay half cost for another 6 months after that. Salaried workers got the same deal. It sounded generous until you realized what it meant. People who'd spent 30, 40 years at the factory would receive 30 or 40 weeks of severance before facing an uncertain future. Alvin Apple Still, president of Local 80 of the United Food and Commercial Workers, represented 640 hourly employees. He'd seen this coming. The strikes. The work stoppages. The company building facilities elsewhere, but knowing it was coming didn't make it easier. The economic impact on Camden would be devastating. The plant had an annual payroll of $48 million. It pumped $13 million worth of goods, services, and supplies into the regional economy yearly. Remove that from a city already struggling with urban decline and poverty, and you create a hole that might never fill. Campbell's promise to maintain its corporate headquarters in Camden, plans for a new $35 million headquarters building on the waterfront, $25 million for expanding the Campbell Institute for Research and Technology, $20 million for renovating existing headquarters. State and local officials remained skeptical. They'd heard corporate promises before. Production at Plant Number 1 was scheduled to end March 1, 1991. The company that Joseph Campbell and Abraham Anderson founded in 1869 would stop making soup in Camden after 122 years. The water towers still stood. For now. We're halfway through this incredible story. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means everything. March 1st, 1991. Camden, New Jersey. The last shift at Campbell's Plant Number 1 began like thousands of shifts before it. Workers clocked in. Machinery started up. Cans moved down production lines, but everyone knew this was different. By midnight, it would all be over. During its heyday in the 1930s, the Camden plant had produced 10 million cans per day. 10 million, but by 1991, output had dropped to about 1 million cans daily. Mostly Prego spaghetti sauce, Franco-American pasta, beans. Not the condensed soups that made Campbell's famous, those had already moved elsewhere. Employees gathered in front of the 8-story building throughout the day. Some wore drab green Campbell's uniforms. They shook hands, shared memories, said goodbye to colleagues they'd worked alongside for decades. Many had family connections to the factory, fathers who worked there, grandfathers who helped build it, entire lives defined by shifts at Campbell's. "Today is the funeral," said Alvin Apple Still, union president. "Tomorrow is the burial." Some workers were in their 50s and 60s. They'd spent their entire adult lives in that building. Their skills were specific to canning operations. Who would hire them? Where would they find comparable wages? Camden's economy was already declining. Other major employers had left. RCA had closed its Camden plant. New jobs weren't coming. These workers faced an uncertain future in a city with few options. At midnight, the machinery stopped. The production lines went silent. The last can rolled through. Workers who'd operated those machines for years walked out into the darkness knowing they'd never come back. 122 years of continuous production ended. The factory that once employed thousands now employed nobody. The next day, March 2nd, 1991, plant number 1 officially closed. The doors locked. Security guards patrolled empty halls. Machinery that had run constantly for decades sat motionless. The building that had defined Camden's identity became a hollow shell. Campbell Soup Company moved forward. Sales at other facilities increased. The restructuring plan that CEO David Johnson implemented was working. By June 1991, Johnson had closed or sold 20 plants worldwide, reduced the company's workforce by 15.5%, eliminated unprofitable product lines. The company's financial health improved. But in Camden, something irreplaceable had died. The factory where condensed soup was invented, where the Campbell Kids were born, where 10 million cans per day once represented American industrial might, gone. The water towers, those giant red and white soup cans visible from the Benjamin Franklin Bridge, still stood. But not for long. November 1st, 1991, Camden, New Jersey. 8 months after the final shift ended, explosive specialists prepared the Camden factory for controlled demolition. The 8-story main building. The water towers painted like soup cans. The smokestacks that had belched steam for over a century, all scheduled for destruction. This wasn't preservation. This wasn't conversion to new use. This was complete erasure. Campbell's had decided the buildings held no value. Better to tear them down than maintain them. Better to clear the land than repurpose the structures. The factory that represented 122 years of American industrial history would become rubble. Crowds gathered to watch. Former workers, Camden residents, people who'd grown up with those water towers dominating the skyline. Photographers positioned themselves for the shot. The moment had weight. This wasn't just demolishing buildings, this was demolishing identity. The explosives detonated. The towers collapsed. The main building crumbled. Massive clouds of dust rose over the Camden waterfront. The noise echoed across the Delaware River to Philadelphia. In seconds, structures that took decades to build became heaps of twisted metal and broken concrete. For travelers crossing the Benjamin Franklin Bridge, the view changed permanently. For most of the 20th century, those giant soup can water towers had been impossible to miss. They represented Campbell's dominance, Camden's industrial heritage, American manufacturing at its peak. Now, nothing. Just empty space where icons used to stand. The demolition crew worked for weeks clearing debris, hauling away metal for scrap, breaking up concrete, removing every trace of what had been. By the time they finished, you couldn't tell a factory had ever stood there. The ground where 5,000 workers once labored during peak season became vacant land. Grass eventually grew over it. Campbell Soup Company kept its promise about headquarters. They maintained corporate offices in Camden. White-collar jobs for executives, accountants, marketing staff. In 2009, they completed construction of a new expanded headquarters in the city. Modern, climate-controlled, nothing like the old factory. But headquarters employees don't have the same economic impact as factory workers. They don't pump millions into the local economy through purchases and services. They don't create the ecosystem of suppliers, truckers, maintenance workers, and support staff that a manufacturing plant generates. Camden got corporate offices. What it lost was the beating heart of its industrial economy. By 1991, no physical evidence of the Campbell Soup Cannery remained. The company that Joseph Campbell and Abraham Anderson founded continued thriving. $10 billion in annual sales by the early 21st century. Profits around $1 billion. Just not in Camden. Not anymore. Never again. 2008. Camden, New Jersey. Campbell's announced another restructuring. This time their only Canadian factory. Toronto, opened in 1930, 78 years of production, 380 jobs. All gone, production shifted to existing United States facilities. The pattern continued. The logic was consistent. Consolidate. Streamline. Eliminate redundancy. Modern food manufacturing required efficiency above all else. Newer facilities with automation could produce more with fewer workers. Rural locations offered cheaper labor and less union resistance. Why maintain old urban factories when you could build modern plants elsewhere? Campbell's continued acquiring brands. Bolthouse Farms in 2012 for $1.5 billion, trying to reach younger, more affluent consumers. Pacific Foods in 2017 for $700 million, expanding into organic products. Snyder's-Lance in 2018 for $4.87 billion, the largest acquisition in company history, pivoting toward snacks. By 2024, snacks comprised nearly half of Campbell's sales. The company that invented condensed soup and dominated the soup market for generations was becoming something else. Not abandoning soup entirely, but diversifying away from the product that made them famous. In September 2024, Campbell's announced a name change. Campbell's Soup Company would become the Campbell's Company. Dropping soup from the corporate name, recognition that the business had evolved beyond its founding product. The red and white cans remained. The Campbell Kids still appeared occasionally in marketing. But the company itself was moving on. Meanwhile, the economic devastation in Camden continued. The city that once thrived on manufacturing employment became one of the poorest cities in America. Unemployment remained persistently high. Poverty rates soared. The tax base that supported schools and infrastructure eroded. Campbell's corporate headquarters provided some jobs, but nothing compared to what was lost. The pattern repeated across American industrial cities. Factories that defined communities for generations closed. Production moved to lower-cost locations. Companies prioritized shareholders over communities. Workers with decades of experience found themselves unemployed in cities with few opportunities. The social fabric that manufacturing employment provided stable wages, benefits, retirement security unraveled. Campbell's was hardly unique. Rossier left Camden. Other manufacturers followed. Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, dozens of other cities experienced similar declines. The American industrial economy transformed. Manufacturing jobs moved overseas or to rural locations or disappeared entirely through automation. Urban centers that built their identities around production faced uncertain futures. Campbell succeeded as a company. Sales grew. Profits returned. The Dorrance family's initial investment generated generational wealth. But success for shareholders didn't mean success for Camden. The city where it all began was left behind. 2025, Camden, New Jersey. Campbell's corporate headquarters still operates in Camden, 1,600 employees, white-collar work, marketing, finance, research and development. The company invested $50 million upgrading facilities in the 2010s, new buildings with amenities, on-site daycare, cafe, fitness center, modern workspace designed to attract talent. But walk to where the factory once stood and you find nothing. No historical marker. No monument. No acknowledgement that the most important industrial site in Campbell's history existed there for over a century. Just empty space. Grass. Maybe some newer construction unrelated to Campbell's. The company still produces soup. Massive facilities in Napoleon, Ohio, Paris, Texas, Maxton, North Carolina, Willard, Ohio, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Modern plants with automation and efficiency that the old Camden factory could never match. Production continues. Just elsewhere. Campbell's faced recent controversies. In September 2025, their Napoleon, Ohio plant admitted to violating the Clean Water Act, dumping millions of gallons of waste into the Maumee River, which feeds Lake Erie. 6.5 years of violations. The kind of environmental damage that earlier generations never considered but that modern regulations attempted to prevent. In November 2025, a lawsuit emerged alleging racist comments by an executive. Martin Bally allegedly stated during a meeting that Campbell's makes food for poor people and that executives don't want to eat it because the meat is bioengineered and came from a 3D printer. Bally was dismissed by the company later that month, but the lawsuit revealed tensions about corporate culture and food quality. These weren't the images Campbell's wanted associated with their brand. The wholesome Campbell Kids. The comfort of tomato soup. Good. But modern corporations face modern scrutiny, environmental violations, labor lawsuits, questions about food quality and ingredient sourcing. The Campbell's Company in 2025 bears little resemblance to the Joseph Campbell Preserve Company of 1869. The product portfolio has expanded beyond recognition. Ownership has changed hands multiple times. The founding family's influence has diminished. The company name no longer includes soup. What remains constant? The red and white cans, the Campbell script, the bronze medallion from the Paris Exposition. Visual elements created over a century ago still identify the brand. Andy Warhol's paintings hang in museums, giving Campbell's cultural significance beyond commerce. People still visit Warhol's grave and leave Campbell soup cans as tribute, but in Camden, where it all began, the only thing left is headquarters. No cans roll off production lines. No workers operate machinery. The factory is gone. The water towers demolished. The industrial heritage erased. Camden gave Campbell's its start. Campbell's gave Camden a future. Then took it away. Drive across the Benjamin Franklin Bridge today from Philadelphia to Camden. Look toward the waterfront where those giant soup can water towers once stood. You'll see modern buildings, office space, a city trying to reinvent itself. But you won't see the factory. The Campbell's Company still lists its headquarters as Camden, New Jersey. Still operates corporate offices there. Still employs people. But if you asked a Camden resident what Campbell's means to the city now, you'd get different answers than you would have gotten in 1950, or 1930, or 1900. What happened at Campbell's factory in Camden teaches us three fundamental lessons about American industry. The first lesson is about innovation and timing. John Dorrance invented condensed soup at exactly the right moment. Working-class families needed affordable convenience foods. Transportation costs were limiting food distribution. Dorrance's chemistry solved both problems simultaneously. But innovation alone doesn't guarantee longevity. The company that pioneered condensed soup eventually found that innovation meant building facilities elsewhere. Camden benefited from being first. It suffered from being old. The second lesson is about labor and power. Workers at Campbell's fought for decades for fair wages and decent conditions. They won union recognition in 1940 after years of struggle. They achieved improvements through strikes and work stoppages. But every victory gave the company more reason to look elsewhere for production. Labor power is real. But so is capital mobility. Campbell's could close Camden and move to Ohio or Texas. Workers couldn't close Ohio and move the factory back. The third lesson is about communities and corporations. For over a century, Campbell's and Camden were intertwined. The company provided jobs, funded charities, defined the city's identity. Those water towers weren't just infrastructure. They were symbols. Camden took pride in Campbell's success. But when maintaining the Camden factory became less profitable than closing it, the company chose profit. Corporate loyalty to communities lasts exactly as long as the financial incentives align, not longer. The numbers tell the story clearly. From 1869 to 1991, Campbell's operated in Camden. 122 years of continuous production, at peak, 10 million cans per day. 5,000 workers year-round. Thousands more during harvest. Annual payroll of $48 million in 1990. Then nothing. The last can rolled off March 1st, 1991. Demolition on November 1st, 1991. By 1992, no trace remained. What's left? Corporate headquarters. About 1,600 white-collar jobs. The Campbell's name on buildings. And memories. Lots of memories. Former workers who remember shifts in the heat. Families who depended on Campbell's wages for generations. A city that built itself around an industry that left. The modern Campbell's company thrives. 10 billion in annual sales. Global distribution. Iconic brands, just not in the city where condensed soup was invented. Camden gave Campbell's its foundation. Campbell's gave Camden its future. Then Campbell's moved on. The factory is gone, but every time you see those red and white cans, remember, someone in Camden once made them, and someone in Camden lost their job when the company decided they didn't need Camden anymore.